Once again, I, the Game Master, Master of Games, Keith, how are you? Here to talk about another character spotlight. This is for Maor, the Scout. Now, Maor is statistically sort of the Batman of the group. Very capable, as you can see, the stats down the right side. Strength, Dex, Con, Int, Ego, Presence. All very high compared to a normal human of 8. And this is sort of a Olympic level or very enhanced levels of physical prowess. Strength, Dex, Con, just very hardy. A lot going on in the old brain basket, and very capable. Ego is your strength of will, again very very high. Presence is not unlike because presence can be varied in the way it's sort of presented. Doesn't have a huge imposing presence, but there's something about his eyes that you don't want to mess with Maor. Combat values, we'll talk about those over in the middle of the sheet, and just overall, just a very hardy and tough guy. So stats, just compare him to the other characters, and you'll kind of see where Maor lays. The middle of the sheet is important because this is going to be where you live during combat. Endurance, stun, and body are going to be applied, and I'll be telling you those values. It's just a nice place to have all the information. Vital information, again, everything is here, but it's all taken from other places in the character sheet, and we'll talk about that more in detail. I will do a specific separate video about hitting and damage. We'll do that later. We've kind of dabbled a little bit in it as we've gone, but I want to be very clear and specific, so coming soon. Over movement, not really important either. Range modifier, sure, whatever. Complications is where we start getting more specific to each character. And there's a couple of things about complications that might be interesting to cover here. These are intended to be things that apply sometimes in combat, sometimes out of combat, sometimes just personality quirks, whatever. And depending on how many points you're getting out of them, and depending on how much you want to pursue them, can apply a different level of effect, I suppose. So the weakness for women, I don't think the intent was to be something like as strong as if it's an ogress, I will not attack her, for she is a woman. I don't believe that's the intent. I believe it was more of a role-playing intent for, hey, maybe, hey, ladies, that type of thing, rather than I can only hunt male animals. So, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you can clarify that for me. The Nunavut military, well, we already sort of know, but I'll go into a little bit more detail of why that's a complication. Because you think, hey, I'm in the military. This is great. I get all the benefits of delicious military food, and what could go possibly wrong? Ben, that's an interesting one. In the origin story of Maor, Ben is a childhood friend. So why is Ben a complication? Well, that remains to be seen, but we will develop that story as we go. However, interestingly enough, Ben. Now, 8 or less is not very often. What that means is the occurrence. Is Ben constantly hanging out and complicating your life, or is he complicating your life only occasionally? In this case, it's only occasional. Dislike of crowds and noisy places. This is another one that can have a scale. Does it mean you are incapable of handling it, where you're like, I literally take damage, or I will not walk another 10 feet into that marketplace? Or is it something you just prefer not to do, or will avoid if you can? Those are the kind of things that we have to, sort of develop more as the character goes on. And another point of complications is they're not always necessarily on the sheet. They can be developed later. They can be added later. Something like I provide an encounter and I attack with goblins, and just for whatever reason you decide, well, goblins, right? I can't believe what they did to my brother. And everyone looks at you and says, I didn't see that in your character sheet. That's the beauty of role-playing. That's the beauty of these games, is you don't have to always reveal necessarily everything. Of course, in the true nature of a game, you do want the character sheet to represent what you do and don't do. But I like to be a little bit more open. I like to add things and to maybe, make some creative choices with complications. So keep that in mind. Complications are not, this whole character sheet does not define your character 100% of the time. We are human beings, and like all human beings, our character should have the same level of depth that we do. So feel free to move these around, to be fluid with them, to make different decisions as you develop your character. All right, moving on. Attacks and maneuvers, we'll cover a little bit more of that in the specific combat tutorial, but you have a long sword and a short bow. This is the damage it does. Nothing really interesting there. Senses, this is another area where Maor is very unique. Maor has been focusing and developing his sense of hearing beyond normal human ways. Remember, and now there's something about magic in this world that I'll get a little more into later, but suffice it to say that this is not a standard thing. This is magically enhanced through just sheer focus and the things that Maor has been doing his whole life. +4 hearing means his perception in the hearing audible range is very enhanced. Discriminatory hearing means he can very specifically pick out things like people's heartbeats. He can know the difference between people. He can make some judgment calls on what they're thinking or doing based on, obviously like heartbeats, kind of like Daredevil. If you've read Daredevil comics, I picture it sort of at that level. And as we move on, we'll talk more about there's a really important one here, overall levels. You might have seen this in the combat. We'll talk about this further in the character sheet. So the skills, perks, and talents, Maor is very capable of a lot of the basic everyman skills. He has enhanced ability. The only one that's not enhanced is disguise, because I didn't see any real reason for Maor to be disguising themselves. Concealment is a little bit different than disguise. Now, one of the things to talk about with perks and talents is you can use these in complement with each other. And the reason that's important to mention is that Maor is he's probably the most skill-intensive character of the group. And the reason for that is I think of him as sort of the Batman of the group. He's not necessarily overly powered compared to all the other characters, but he has a lot of knowledge skills and a lot of really stable and powerful stats, which makes him sort of good at almost everything he does, but maybe not the best. And the way that the skills are going to complement, especially the way the player in particular plays the game, is using a lot of creativity and ways to approach problems in maybe not the most direct, hey, that's something bad, let's hit it with a hammer until it goes away. It's more about the creative approach to how are we going to solve this problem. And so when you see some of these, there might be some elements that you have that are tied in with others. So let's take, for instance, give you an example, medical and herbs. You can, of course, use them to complement each other. So, and then you can go further and say that I have knowledge of the desert flora and fauna. So I'm in my element, I'm in the desert, I'm looking for herbs that help so I could make something that will heal wounds. And all those together would be complementary, an example of complementary skills. So every skill roll that you make prior to the role you want to make. So let's say you want to make the medical roll because you really need something that's going to help from a very specific ailment. Maybe there's a specific poison and you need to find an antidote for it. Well, you roll your desert flora fauna, and let's say you succeed by 2. Then you would add 2 to your, okay, I'm going to look for specific herbs that I need. I know what I need to find them. So herbalism, you roll, that's 13 or less. Well, now it's 15 or less because you had the +2. And now you roll that, and you roll 10. That gives you +5. And now medical is 13 + 5 is now 18 or less. And let's say because of the rarity of the poison, the dungeon master or the game master, rather, has said, all right, this is not going to be an easy thing to find a cure for. So I'm going to give you a -3 to your roll. Well, you're at 15 or less. Pretty good chance that you're going to make that roll. So the idea of complementary skills adds on to your final skill roll, and we can discuss those things, discuss what's on your mind. Hey, I have this. Would that complement that? Of course it would. Let's do it. But you do have to bring it up. The whole idea of that is to give you avenues and paths to success, and how to, the more time you spend and the more knowledge you have on any particular subject can complement other skills. So everyone keep that in mind, but especially Maor. All right, over to spells, powers, and equipment. We've got night fighting. What is that? It means Maor can fight without his eyes. So visual impairment has no effect on his ability to fight. As you would expect, if I said you were blinded, you would have a hard time hitting your opponent. But not Maor. He can use everything with the power of his eyeballs. I don't know. His ears are enhanced. Find weakness. This is another interesting one. Maor can, after assessing an opponent for a period of time, Maor is able to find the weakness in their armor. Find weakness works like this. He has an 11 or less chance to find weakness. That means it takes a half phase action, so you have to be in the middle of let's say you're using your sword, you'll have to be in melee range, so you're fighting your opponent, you're in melee range, you don't have to move. Your first phase, or first half of your phase, will be to roll your find weakness. If you make that roll 11 or less, you can reduce your opponent's defenses exactly in half. So 6 armor becomes 3 armor. If you do it again, you can do it again? Yes, you can. You can do it as many times as you want. It just takes a half phase action. Eventually, Maor will find a place to poke you with his stabby things and get through your armor. So just keep that in mind. Tough, scary guys with a lot of armor on. It's just a matter of time. Overall levels. This is very important, and this is another one of Maor's unique abilities. Overall levels can be applied to anything. That means, and of course they're separate. It's 2 overall levels. It's not necessarily +2. So mathematically, let's be clear. It's 2 distinct overall levels. So how is that applied? What does that mean? That means on your phase, you assign these levels as they would be assigned. So if you're in the middle of a fight, typically you'd say, I want to hit this guy. I'm going to put a level or 2 levels into offensive combat value. Let's say you're on the other side of it. You don't want to get hit by a person. Well, then +2 to DCV. Or you can split them. 1 OCV, 1 DCV. Balance it out. Whatever you want to do. But it's important to assign those, because why wouldn't you, right? The overall levels can also be assigned to skills. We were talking earlier about your medical role, and you want to get that particular thing. Well, instead of 13 or less, you could definitely have a 15 or less right off the top. So overall levels are applied to anything, anytime, anywhere. You get 2 of them. Moving on to the technology and equipment. Scouts have a couple of important things, and I want to get sort of into the details, or maybe more of the specifics than I've already gone into. The military gear that's issued, there is something sort of special, and it's already sort of implied in the campaign, but I want to be very clear on it. There is an internet of sorts, a magical field that ties all of these things together. It can be used for communication. It can be used for location, like a GPS, and it also powers and is used for the equipment and magical abilities that the military units have. Now, what does this mean exactly? Well, it does mean there's a lot implied in that what I'm saying, and that means they do know where you are. They do know what you're doing, and that is just part of being in the military. Remember over here the complications? Oh, look at that. Nunavut military. So, Big Brother, all that stuff. The Signet Ring. A level 5 access is a very high access, is a very high rank, and that is giving you access to a spending account, communication, and rank privileges. These Signet Rings are bonded magically to your finger. They can be removed forcibly, or your finger can be chopped off, but keep that in mind. Com Journal is access to the capital city archives. This is a way, sort of like a Google search, for the ability to find information and transfer information directly to the capital. The reason it's 2 questions per game sessions, we don't want to abuse it, but and it does take time for the information to return based on the staffing and based on the maybe the details or the difficulty of the questions that are being asked. If you wanted to get a recipe for eggs, you'll probably get a quick response. If you wanted to get some more detailed information on something very vague or obscure, or that that might be take a little more time for them to do research and hopefully find an answer. So that's how the comm journal works. It's direct communication to the capital city archives and military intelligence available to the scouts. The next one is your enhanced armor and the runes of restoration. These are tied in. The runes are part of the armor, and basically it's a resistant, physical defense, energy defense. We'll talk a little bit more about how defenses are applied in my combat video, but suffice it to say, it pretty much covers the whole body. There are some areas where it doesn't cover. That's why it's only a 14 or less to apply that armor. So there are ways to get between the heavy plates of enhanced leather, and maybe the tip of your nose and the tips of your toes are not specifically covered, but otherwise it's a pretty good coverage. And yeah, that's it. Runes of Restoration are a self-heal. You can do it 4 times a day, protecting yourself from from damage. This applies to both stun and body, and we'll talk more about that in the specific combat videos. Okay, I think I've covered the character sheet and the basics. If you have any questions, of course, this is what we're here for, and I hope you enjoyed the character spotlight for Maor the Scout. Until next time.